Well, this is my election update for December the 1st, 2020. Um, okay, we had a big event yesterday, the Arizona meeting with the state legislature members and Rudy Giuliani and some Jenna Ellis too. And they brought a bunch of the experts and people that are backing the challenge. Notable, I guess, there was a colonel whose name I forget, retired colonel, who seemed to be an expert in these computer systems, and apparently, I get the feeling has some background in this sort of thing himself. I mean, in terms of maybe our American operations against other countries, you might say. It sounds like he understands how this works and how systems can be hacked, and he's exposed a lot of vulnerabilities that he claims the Dominion system has and asserts that basically all the things that Sidney Powell has suggested about the systems themselves, if you're familiar with that he basically backs that up with some expertise. Perhaps he's one of our key sources. That wasn't necessarily stated in the meeting, but I get that feeling. Um, so the other key witness there was a Dr. Shiva, who has a lot of degrees from MIT, and seems to be a fairly expert person. He obviously did some analysis of Democrat and Republican voting trends and some mathematical analysis. I'm sort of familiar with the style of thing he did in a sense, and he tried to basically fit a model to show the voting turnout, and he seemed to indicate that there was a major swap between Republicans and Democrats in the voting. And I have a little bit of a problem with anybody that's asserting this mass voter swap theory. I know it appeals to some people who just can't buy the idea that Biden got nearly 80 million votes or whatever, but I'll get into that later, what my thinking is on this. The other thing was involved, Matt Brainerd made a presentation. It was brief. I thought that was very interesting material because what he's done is, with some funding, apparently, he's put together a calling center where they actually identify people who voted absentee, who they have evidence have moved out of state or something, and they'll call them up and ask them, did you request an absentee ballot? And many of them are saying no. So they seem to have found a group of people who voted absentee, or their name was voted absentee, but they assert that they didn't ever receive a ballot or request one. And this seems to be a pattern of voting fraud that seems to be going on, where people have been voting for people that used their name. They moved out of state, so they presumably won't be voting, so I'll go ahead and request an absentee ballot in their name and stuff of that sort. It's also possible, I guess, some of the individuals could be lying and really did vote, but obviously realizing they committed voter fraud and somebody's asking about it, are going to say, no, I didn't do it. But at any rate, these are clearly votes that shouldn't be counted. And he was able to identify about 2,000 in Maricopa County, which is the data set where he had sufficient data so far. Now, he's done much broader things in other states like Georgia and Michigan and so forth. So his operation is very interesting. And I think in some cases, we'll get to Georgia in a second, this presents to me a bit more concrete story than some of the math modeling, although I appreciate math modeling. It's kind of my background, but I'm still thinking, yeah, there are other possibilities. For instance, in the polling data before the election, I'll get briefly into this, certainly due to Rasmussen, there was about a 20% changeover between Republicans and Democrats. It depends on what poll and what time period. But there were a fair number of Democrats voting for Trump and a fair number of otherwise Republicans apparently not voting for Trump, the so-called never Trump people. So you have this, I mean, in other words, you put that factor together with what Dr. Shiva is saying, and you might come to a different conclusion about whether or not there was a mass Dominion vote swapping effort. There is evidence that was presented there that 35,000 votes in one of the counties in is it I can forget the name. It's Primera. I can't mispronounce it, but it's one of the counties, at any rate, in Arizona, and it's not the Phoenix area, but it's another one. And in that area, 35,000 votes for Democrat candidates were entered very rapidly at the beginning of the count. And according to this expert, it was faster than the scanners could actually upload it. Therefore, it was done basically digitally. And there's some anonymous email, which would be not, they would like for him to come forward and do it under oath, of course, who stated that in fact that was done, and apparently he's aware of it. So it's presumably an insider leak, or I guess it could be somebody just making it up. But that in fact was done. So there is evidence in the data, and there's also this email, anonymous email, that supports that theory that in fact they did throw in 35,000 votes. Well, if there are 35,000 Biden votes that are legitimate, that's more than a margin of victory, and so that itself should draw the election in Arizona into question. There's also, there was a lot of testimony from people that worked at the polls, either observers or poll workers, and they indicate a variety of ongoing fraud, failing to verify signatures adequately, switching votes from Trump to Biden, and all this is sort of incremental and sort of anecdotal, but if one observer sees it, probably other people would see it if they were coming forward. And so it looks like that there was a fair amount of grassroots voter fraud going on in favor of Biden in the Arizona count as well. So that kind of, that pretty much covers a lot of what was presented in the meeting. It's a very lengthy meeting. I watched nearly the whole thing. And I guess the effort is to try to get some sort of a resolution in the legislature to take, charge of the electors from the Secretary of State. So, and one of the things that I think was a really sad thing to see is that the very day this was going on, the governor, Secretary of State and governor certified the election. I mean, like just totally ignoring this evidence that's being put out. And that's just typical of what we have seeing here. That's why I kind of make the comment that the fix is in. They're determined to install Biden no matter what it looks like. It looks to me like at least they could have waited a day or two and at least, looked over the evidence that was presented first and see what could be done about it. I mean, it is, but okay, so let's get on to Georgia here. The Kraken was released, and now the Kraken is in action, actually. She's apparently getting a hearing as of this time in the U.S. District Court for Northern Georgia. The Atlanta District Court, they are going to schedule a hearing, which should happen on Friday, on her motion. They've impounded the machines for now, the Dominion machines in Georgia, and they're looking to have a hearing to have an audit of those machines, I guess, to see if they can find evidence of the vote swapping effort. And my thinking on the use of Dominion to steal votes is, in so much it's being done, I think it's done more surgically than macroscopically. That's just my personal. Let's put it this way: if I was a bad guy and I was doing it, that's what I would do. I wouldn't do something so big that would be obvious. I would do something surgically, just enough that you could cover it up, and at least it would be unclear what happened to an independent observer, let's say. And so that I think is more likely, and it would take a forensic examination to see if that's the case. The reason for suspicion is because there was an incident where there was a claim that there was a water leak and they had to evacuate the counting center, but in reality that was apparently a hoax. And in fact, the people, after the observers left, certain workers remained behind and continued to work on the machines for several hours. And there apparently is surveillance tape. So it would be very interesting. That's been subpoenaed in this lawsuit also. So there is a basis to have some investigation here. And we'll just have to wait and see what the judge rules, but at least they seem to be getting a hearing as opposed to just being dismissed with the back of the hand. And she also has a lot of the Matt Bramer stuff in there, which is much more extensive than the Arizona case. And that shows sufficient numbers of people that voted from after they left the state, plus people who had voted absentee, but their vote was never received, allegedly. And if we add to the fact that there may be some skullduggery with how the ballots are being processed, that could be a situation where certain numbers of Trump votes were actually thrown out and then replaced with Biden votes. And remember, there is a sworn affidavit where a poll worker states he saw a significant number, and I don't know the exact number, and that's what's important here, of ballots that appear to be printed rather than filled out by people and not folded like it was sent in an envelope. So you put all that together, there is a case that there's a margin of victory for Trump there if the votes were switched around to Trump or if they were just thrown out potentially. And so we'll just have to monitor and see how this suit goes, but at least it's got enough traction it's going to get a hearing in court rather than simply being dismissed like we saw repeatedly in Pennsylvania, which was really pretty outrageous there. And of course, the Sean Parnell lawsuit was overturned with a very biased state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. I don't think it says anything against what he did, really. It's just that court is just so biased it isn't objective at all. So we're going to have to appeal to federal court and see if we get any traction there. So that kind of gives us a bit of the lay of the land here. I have no information at all on what happened to the Sidney Powell lawsuit in Michigan at this point. I know it was filed, but beyond that, I haven't heard what its status is at all. And so that'll be something to look forward to see what happens there. They completed their count in Wisconsin, and that came out essentially with no major change. I think actually Biden picked up a few votes, irrelevant. The whole theory was to get people in there during the recount and develop some identification of votes to be challenged, and I think they're going to file a lawsuit shortly thereafter on Wisconsin. So, and the biggie is that they're now in position because of the rejections in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals in Pennsylvania to make an appeal to the Supreme Court of the U.S. The question is, when do they do that, and do they wait for some of these other cases to develop first or not? Strategically, the situation has now evolved that all 306 of Biden's purported projected electoral votes have been certified now by the secretaries of state in the various states. So there really is nothing standing in the way at the moment for the stop Biden from being installed as president on January the 20th. Okay, that is okay. So at this point, in a way, there kind of is time. I mean, we could argue that when the electors vote on the 14th, that it's case closed, but really they're not counted in the Congress to January the 6th. So it's very likely that these court battles will continue throughout that period. Obviously, it'd be better to put a kibosh on this stuff before the electors vote on the 14th, I think. But I don't know that that's absolutely necessary. And in President Trump interview on the Maria Bartiromo program on Sunday, I think he's kind of indicated that too. So it looks to me like the battle is going to continue, and we'll just have to see how much traction they make. Prediction on the Georgia case is interesting that at least it is getting a hearing. Up to now, we haven't had an evidentiary hearing in court too much, except, of course, another case is a smaller one I haven't mentioned too much, is they're making some progress in Nevada. And apparently there's going to be an evidentiary hearing in Nevada with a judge out there. And I understand the Democrats are swooped in with an army of lawyers to fight them there. So there's two evidentiary hearings happening now, which is progress over where we were early on. And I think the evidence is developing clearly that there was a substantial amount of fraud. And a lot of it seems to be just almost systematic. It's almost like all the Democrats that were in a position to do something felt free to do things this time. I don't mean every individual, but I just mean that it was pervasive. The idea of intervening and changing votes. There's a case where people deliberately were spoiling Trump ballots by marking things on them and then saying the ballot is bad and then changing it to Biden, or they were letting people that were very questionable background, probably out of state, vote in certain district in Arizona, and the local registrar's office was okaying all of them, but potential Trump voters that simply moved from another county were not being allowed. So it seemed like there was a coordination between people in the registrar's office potentially, and and the people in the polling place to get these people to vote. Be heads up to Georgia, look out for that, I guess I'd say, because the same folks are probably going to try something there if they can. So there's always the issue: is the fraud enough? But the fact is, some of these states, particularly Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and maybe Nevada, are close enough that if you take into account all the different means of fraud, people voting from out of state, people voting from in-state that were fraudulent, people at the polls that were mishandling ballots and deliberately doing things to help Biden out, if you add that all up, it does come out with a credible margin that the election was stolen. And that's without assuming any of this magic Dominion vote swapping stuff. If that was used on top of that, which it may have been used selectively, then you pretty much have enough to make your case if people will accept it as adequate evidence. Well, okay, that just kind of summarizes where I am today. I think, again, my little apology to people on Parler. I made the wrong link one day, and I think that's damaged my credibility there. But it's been really difficult there because they've been very difficult letting you. Pictures are no longer posting when I put a link in like they were. That could be a YouTube thing rather than a Parler thing. I'm not sure. I'm getting the same thing on Facebook now. And so I don't know what's going on with the systems, but it seems like things were working for me recently are not as good. But at any rate, I hope I got it straightened out how to place a link that at least gets you to where you can find these videos and just look at the list of new videos. The top left will be the latest, and so if you like these, give me a like on there, and if you're a member of YouTube, subscribe, of course, and you can send links on to other people, I guess, but maybe it's more difficult than before. It seems like these systems are acting up lately. So I'll close this for now.